Someone ought to do something about that. Someone ought to do something about that. How many times have we said that in our lives? Probably all of us at some point have said that. When we observe something that isn't right, we usually will say, someone ought to do something about that. But the other side of the coin, how many times have we said, I ought to do something about that, and actually go and do it? When we see something needing to be done, very often it's easy to say someone else ought to take care of that. It's a little harder when we acknowledge something needing to be done for us to say, I will be the one to go and do it. If you take those two different sentences, way of thinking, and take them to the readings, it really is kind of where our readings are today. We have the prophet Amos. We heard from Amos last week, and we hear this week again from Amos. And what is Amos the prophet doing? He's calling the elite of society, and he's calling them out, not because of their wealth, does not criticize them because they are wealthy, but rather he is criticizing them because of their complacency. We hear it very clearly in the first reading. It wasn't because they were wealthy, it was because they were complacent. They saw the sufferings of their brothers and sisters and did nothing about it. Amos was one of the oldest of the prophets. He was really from Judea, the southern kingdom, and he was called by God to be a prophet, to go to the northern kingdom of Israel to be that prophet. And Amos is in Jerusalem, rebuking the aristocracy of the time. He rebukes their lives, which were filled with comfort and leisure. And why was he rebuking them for this comfort and leisure? Because they really did not care for the fact that their fellow Israelites in the north were being disseminated. They were being impoverished. They were being killed by their enemies. These individuals did not care that 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel were facing exile and extinction. They simply didn't care. They were complacent. And because of their complacency, somebody else ought to take care of that attitude, I suppose. Amos prophesies that they are going to share the same fate as their northern cousins. We hear very clearly in the reading, they shall be the first to go into exile. Complacency is a problem. Complacency is very dangerous. Complacency does not solve anything, and complacency generally leads to destruction. A complacent person is not a person of action. Either you're complacent or you're a person of action. So a complacent person is not a person of action, and a complacent person is basically satisfied with what they have and really feels no obligation or personal need to aid the suffering of someone else. Complacency is a real problem. And that's the same problem that we see really in the gospel, the very familiar parable of the rich man and Lazarus. What was the sin of the rich man? Complacency. He was complacent, blind to the needs, the very basic needs of Lazarus the beggar. Maybe this rich man questioned, is this all an act just to get money out of me? Is he just playing up to me for something else? Maybe he just simply was so complacent he didn't care. Maybe the rich man thought, someone ought to do something about this, but that someone's not going to be me. The rich man eventually learns after death that this way of thinking, this complacency, is a real problem. It led him to the point to beg Moses, send someone to my brothers so they will change their ways and not land up the same way as myself. We have to be cautious in our own lives and avoid that complacent attitude, because the complacency not only does not solve the problems of others, but it also destroys us in the same process. What is the solution to complacency? All we have to do is look at the second reading today, Paul's letter to Timothy. Paul is telling Timothy, go and do something. Be a person of action. Do not be a person of complacency. He tells Timothy to do what? Go and practice righteousness, practice devotion, faith, love, practice patience, practice gentleness. And if these virtues are literally followed and lived, it will draw us out of complacency to be people of action. So what does all that really mean for us in a very practical way? Who are these individuals in need? Who's Lazarus today? Well, a story that maybe some of you have heard me tell. I know I have shared it in a couple homilies along the way. And goes back a few years when my older nephew was graduating from law school, and I went to New York for his graduation from NYU. And graduation was at Madison Square Garden. My hotel was just a couple blocks away. And I remember that morning walking to Madison Square Garden and looking about a block ahead of where I was. I saw an older gentleman, definitely appeared to be indigent, and I could see he had a little cup from, a coffee shop in his hand. It was obvious he was asking people for money. And I had my black suit on and my Roman collar, so I knew I was going to get asked, And I was really prepared for that. But as I approached the gentleman, he was an elderly man, and he had a baseball cap on, and he took his baseball cap off and said, "Good morning, Father," and smiled, and I said good morning to him. He did not ask me for anything, nor did I put anything into his cup. And I almost immediately felt bad about that, to the point that after graduation was over and for a couple of days I went out looking for him, but I couldn't find him. Later that same day, in the evening, we were heading to dinner and we were walking to the restaurant, and again I was in my black suit and Roman collar, and I was walking with my nephew who had just graduated, and we encountered another indigent gentleman. He called out and said, "Father, can you give me some money to get something to eat?" And my nephew immediately turned to me and he said, "Do not respond to him. He knows you're not from around here." And he said, "And if he really wants something to eat, he is standing in front of the largest soup kitchen in all of Manhattan." He said, "All he's got to do is turn around and walk through those doors, and he'll be able to get a meal." And so we kept walking and called out a second time, "Father, can you give me something so I can get something to eat?" And we kept walking, and then he called me out and he said, "Well, Father, you can at least talk to me. I am a Catholic." He was correct. A couple days passed and we were leaving to come back home, and we took the train. I think it's faster to take the train than fly these days if you're going to New York. And we were in the train station and picking up a sandwich, to take on the train with us. And I was not in my collar. And standing in line, people in front of me, people behind me, a gentleman came up to me. Not to anybody in front of me, not to anybody behind me, he came up to me. And he said, "Can you spare some money so I can get something to eat?" And so I had $20 in my hand, so I figured if $20 was good enough for me for lunch, it's good enough for him, and I handed him the $20 bill. And he thanked me, and in the split second that it would have taken, really, for me to turn and get my wallet, I looked, and the man was gone. Could not see him anywhere. And I wondered who it was I encountered that day. I think I encountered Lazarus. I can keep that question for you, who you think I may have encountered that day. But it is a beautiful blessing that the Lord gives us time and time again, chance after chance after chance, to recognize Lazarus and to be able to reach out to him. I'm sure the rich man had many, many times he saw Lazarus, and time again he chose to do nothing. Who is in need? Who's that Lazarus in our lives? Well, there's a big debate going on, of course, in our country, many debates, but one of them is over immigration and refugees, and we see it unfold in the news. I'm not going to take a side on the story. I'm not going to take a side on the story because I'm not even sure that I know the truth of the story. I know what I hear in the news as you do, and one side of the aisle blaming the other and the other blaming the other. And my father, I'm becoming more and more like him. My father always, when he would read the newspaper, he read the comics first. And if you asked him why, he said, because it's about the only place in the news that you actually get truth, is in the comics. I think he was right. So I'm not going to take a stand on that issue. However, I will say, if as a nation we are welcoming immigrants, all of us were immigrants at some time. Someone somewhere in our families got on a boat or a plane and came over to this country. Maybe you yourself were an immigrant to this country. And when our ancestors came, there were people here to help them. By and large, the Catholic Church helped so many of the early immigrants in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. Church continues to help them today through Catholic Charities. As we welcome people to our nation, if we are saying there is room, please come, the door is open. They are the Lazarus in our midst, and we have a responsibility to care for them. And we might think, well, that's just a big problem, and that's something far greater than me. I'm not in politics. I don't make those decisions, and I really can't, probably in my life, make too big of a difference. So maybe what's more practical for what I can do? Well, 1 week from today, almost this very hour, 2 o'clock, between 2 and 3, I have the opportunity to stand in front of the church right here on Maple Road, holding a sign about human life, to stand for and pray silently for the respect of all life from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death and all of those human life issues that confront us. It's an opportunity to do something for Lazarus, for the unborn, the ill, the aged, anyone whose life may be in danger. We have that opportunity to see Lazarus and take care of Lazarus next Sunday between 2 and 3 in front of our own church. Similarly, you may want to get involved in the St. Gianna Molla Center, which provides resources for women who are pregnant and for young families who cannot afford the proper baby formulas or diapers and so on. Perhaps you can get involved with that group of the church. And perhaps maybe the St. Teresa home, which is on the east side of Buffalo, the rectory of the old St. Adalbert's Church, where women who are pregnant, who have nowhere to live, can go and live, and receive medical care and job training skills and be seen through for the baby to be born and to get on their feet. Maybe we can do that and see Lazarus there and care for Lazarus that way. Maybe it'll be Thanksgiving Day, and Thanksgiving Day we always have the collection for the St. Vincent de Paul Society. They never ask the parish for money. They've never once asked me for 1 penny in my 9 years here, but they rest only on that collection that we take Thanksgiving morning to serve the poor in our very own community, sometimes right here in Williamsville, often in the city of Buffalo. Maybe we'll address Lazarus that day with a generous donation to assist the St. Vincent de Paul Society, or right at the same time, the giving tree will be up in the narthex in the vestibule of the church with many paper ornaments, all with needs of individuals, either through St. Luke's Mission or the Response to Love Center or some of our sister parishes in some of the poorer areas that we provide gifts for our brothers and sisters at Christmas. And if you read those tags, some of them are very humbling, that all they're really asking for are clean underwear and health and hygiene products. The list can go on. Each and every day we do meet Lazarus. Each and every day we have that opportunity to either say, someone ought to do something about that, or hopefully we take that opportunity to say, I will do something about that, and be a person of action, as St. Paul calls us to be, to bring the virtues of Christ alive in this place and time.